This is Tyson Banighen, the energy detector, the Illuminator, bringing you the light and light unto the world. And today I'm wanting to talk to you about crystal skulls and how to work with them. It's one of my favorite topics. And let me just clear my throat here. Yeah, crystal skulls came into my life, I don't know how many years ago. Sarah, how many years ago?
Yeah, quite a lot.
Quite a lot. Yeah, we were on our way to go swimming with the whales off the coast of the Dominican Republic. And prior to going, we were stopped in our friends in Vancouver, and I had this guidance to read this book on crystal skulls, and I thought, well, why am I reading a book on crystal skulls when I'm going to go be swimming with the whales? And I was told, well, just read the book. So I took the book down, and I started to read about crystal skulls. And I read it cover to cover, and it was sort of a crash read. And this was the book that I read. This is Danger, My Ally by Mitchell-Hedges, and it's all about his experience in discovering the Mitchell-Hedges skull. And this is the Mitchell-Hedges skull. It's one of the most beautiful crystal skulls that I've ever met. It's life-size, and it's pure, absolute crystal. Absolutely gorgeous, crystal clear. And there's some things very unusual about this crystal skull. Not only is it the size of a human, but also that it has a prism in the top of its skull, in which, when you shine the light up through the bottom of the skull, it goes up and into the prism here and comes right out the eyes. So if you were to light it with a candle in the pyramid where it sat, there would be beams of light coming out of its eyes. So it raises the question, how could somebody carve a crystal skull and have a prism exactly within the skull at the right angle in order for the light to come out through the eyes? So that's one of the questions, and there's been many scientific studies done on this skull saying, oh, it was carved, and we can find the carving, marks on the skull and all the rest of it. Other people say no, that you can't. And interesting enough, there's been many people that have sat with this skull. So it was in Canada for quite a while. It was discovered by Mitchell-Hedges' daughter, and so she was the caretaker until she passed on. And I've had the good fortune to be with this crystal skull for an extended period of time. The first time was for 3 days in Sedona at this particular gathering here in Sedona, Arizona, and got to be with this crystal skull and to work with it. And then the second crystal skull gathering, I was able to meet it and other skulls and to work with them as well. So that was the first inclination a crystal skull existed and that I should pay attention. So that started the journey. So on the way to swim with the whales, we would do meditation every night in preparation to be in the right vibrational frequency to be able to communicate with the whales. And in this guided meditation, I kept getting pictures of skulls, and I couldn't understand what was going on. And 2 days later, coming up from the beach with this lady who had a crystal skull in her hands. And I said, oh my goodness, that's the crystal skull that's been in my meditation. And she said, well, it doesn't surprise me, because it was 2 or 3 feet away from your head when you were meditating. So it's not surprising that it would be in your mind's eye when you were meditating. And she said, would you like to meet him? And I said, sure. So she handed me the skull, and I immediately had this opportunity to begin to talk to the skull. I'd never thought about it ever before. I never questioned it. I just said, who are you? And it says, well, I'm an interdimensional being. And I said, well, what are you doing in a crystal skull? And said, well, it's the way that I can be on this third plane dimension. I said, well, don't you miss the fact that you can't have arms and legs? And in the body said, oh, not at all. I have a crystal skull carrier that takes me wherever I want. And I just want to go for a swim in the ocean. And she just took me into the ocean. I had a swim, and now she's going to take me out to be with the whales. So it's perfect for me. And I said, well, how come I can communicate with you? And he said, well, because you're on the same bandwidth, the same frequency as I am. I said, well, is that the same with whales? Are you on the same frequency as whales? And he said, yes, I am. And I said, how about porpoises? And he said, yes, of course. So I said, so the reason I can communicate with you is because we're on the same frequency bandwidth. And he said, absolutely. So that was my first experience with a crystal skull, knowing that if you're on the same frequency as that skull, you can have a conversation with it. Well, since then, we've been able to meet many crystal skulls. And the way it goes is, once you have an inkling that about crystal skulls, or you have that first experience, then it's most likely that a crystal skull is going to turn up in your life. And they don't really, it's not really that you're looking for them, they're looking for you. The right crystal skull is ready to arrive in your life. So after that journey, we started looking for a crystal skull. And it took quite a while. We would be in Vancouver, and I'd go to a crystal shop and say, what do you know about crystal skulls? And they tell me all these sorts of really fascinating stories about crystal skulls. And I'd say, well, do you have one in your shop? And the answer was no. So anyway, after a number of these sorts of visits, I was at the Crystal Ark, which was out in Granville Island, which is a crystal shop. And I walked in and I said to the lady there, who happened to be somebody we knew, I said, what do you know about crystal skulls? And she says, wow, I just got back from being in Sedona at the crystals at the rock show, and there was 3 crystal skulls there, and they all wanted to come home with me. And it's the first time I've been at the show, and my boss let me go. And anyway, I brought them all home, and 2 of them are mine, and you can't have them, but there's a 3rd one here. Would you like to meet him? And I said, wow. Sure, I'd like to meet him. So that's how I met my crystal skull. And here he is. This is his name, is Serpent Rainbow Joe. That's the crystal skull that I work with. He is citrine. And so if you can see that there's a fan in the back of his skull like this, so that when the light comes through, you can see a rainbow in the back. I don't know if you can see that in the screen, but there's a rainbow. I can see it in my screen. Hopefully you can see it in yours, where there's actually a fan of rainbow in the back of his skull. So his name is Serpent Rainbow Joe. And the serpent comes from the Mayan people. The rainbow serpent is when you're fully enlightened or activated due to all your chakras being lit up. You become the rainbow serpent. And so Joe is the rainbow serpent, and that's his job. His job is to hang out with people and take them to the next level of consciousness wherever they are. So here he is. And so right now, if you want to have your first crystal skull experience while I hold him, imagine taking this crystal skull and putting your forehead on his forehead, third eye, and asking Crystal Serpent Rainbow Joe to download a message for you. And each message will be uniquely important to the person who asks the question. It's sort of like you open the door by asking the question, and the answer comes through that's specific for you. So go ahead and have an opportunity to ask him what your next best step is, and see if you get any response from being with the crystal skull. So this is Serpent Rainbow Joe, and again, it's the fan in the back of the skull that you can see here. It's hard to move my fingers here, but you can see that there's a rainbow in the back of his skull. So you can see the feathers sticking up in the back of the skull. And if we just turn it into the light, you should be able to see rainbow colors in the back of his skull. So there you are, that's Serpent Rainbow Joe. So skulls can talk to humans if and when you're on the same wavelength. And in fact, if you think about it, we are basically carbon beings, but some say that as we evolve, we are becoming crystalline beings ourselves. So more crystalline we become, the more we're in tune with the crystal, and the more that we can communicate with a crystal skull. The interesting thing about this crystal skull is the back, where that inclusion is pure quartz, and in the front is citrine in the front part of the skull. So there's a distinct line, sort of like the subconscious and the conscious showing up in this crystal skull. So this is Serpent Rainbow Joe. That's the crystal skull I work, and he's met all the major crystal skulls on the planet that I've been able to be in contact. And they're not all of the biggies, but some of them. He's met the Mitchell-Hedges skull and had a conversation with him. So these two have met each other and have communicated with each other for an extended period of time. So what happens is when one skull meets another, is the dominant skull, or the one that has the most knowledge or wisdom in it, which would be, in this case, would be the Mitchell-Hedges skull, then downloads its programs and its knowingness into the other crystal skull. And if you were able to see that as a video, like clear photography, you would see that there would be a blinding, or there'd be a rainbow light from one skull to the other skull. Then there would be pure white light as they disappeared into the white light and they shared information. And then they come back out and there'd be rainbow light, and then they'd settle down. And that means that the two have communicated with each other. And I imagine that that's probably what happens with us humans, is that bridges between our skull and their skull and allows us to have that download into our consciousness. Now, the Mitchell-Hedges skull that we were talking about was found in Labna, and it resided in a Mayan temple. And the Mayans are one of the remnants of the Atlantean and Lemurian peoples that were able to escape the catastrophe as Lemuria sank and Atlantis blew itself up, and were able to establish a colony in the Mayan lands. They also went to Egypt as well. But the Mayan lands is really where you would find the crystal skulls, and every major temple had a resident crystal skull. This one, I think, in my estimation, is one of maybe the original skulls. Now, when I say the original skulls, there's also a legend held by the indigenous people that there will be 12 ancient skulls that will come together around one crystal skull. And this is a painting by my friend of what that would look like when the 12 skulls around the periphery come together with the one master skull to make 13, which is like, the 12 disciples and the 13th being Christ, or the 12 knights of the round table, or the 12 disciples. So 12 and the one that is the orchestra or the conductor of the 12 forms a sacred number of 13 and causes a new age, or new awareness, or new way of being. In our case, I think it will be a new way of being as we move from carbon-based to crystalline-based awareness. So there you are, the 12 crystal skulls around the image of the crystal of love, the Mitchell-Hedges skull. Some call it the skull of doom, but it really is the skull of love. It's a beautiful, beautiful, clear crystal skull. So that's the legend of the 12 crystal skulls, which is actually, with the one in the center, is the legend with 13. Now, I've met some indigenous people that know of this legend. One of them is Many Horses, whose grandfather, and he's from British Columbia, his grandfather raised him and said that he would be instrumental in the coming together of the 13 skulls. So if that were to be true, and maybe it is, and maybe it's not, it would be most likely in our lifetimes that this would occur. It would be a major turning point in bringing the wisdom of many cultures and traditions together. There's also the belief that when we were at Palenque and we met the crystal skull that was in the picture that was advertising this particular crystal skull workshop, that large crystal skull that we met was a Mayan skull. And there is a legend at Palenque, which is where Pacal Voltan, he was a time traveler of the Mayan and may have been instrumental in helping his people do an actual ascension as a whole group of people into another dimension. But that legend or that story is that the 13 skulls will to come together in the courtyard of that temple at Palenque. So who knows? That may be another legend that comes true as well. And I know from experience in talking to many of the Lakonda Mayan people that they have a strong belief and know many, many crystal skulls that in and around the area where they continue to maintain their indigenous knowledge and wisdom and work with crystal skulls. So crystal skulls are very much part of the Mayan tradition, and that's where we've studied about crystal skulls quite extensively with our Mayan shaman elder that we work with there. So, as I mentioned, this was the person who found that crystal skull, Mitchell-Hedges. He was quite an explorer, a bit of a man's man, sort of like Ernest Hemingway. He was always on the edge of trying to do something that was almost superhuman, like catching the biggest fish or whatever. So he was a bit of a character. Some say that he didn't really find this skull, but who knows? Who knows? But the story is worth learning about and reading about. Dangerous, my ally. Now, as I got fascinated with crystal skulls and did go to that conference, I was able to meet somebody who's been working with crystal skulls for a pretty long period of time. And this is, where is his book anyway? Well, here's his book. It's hiding here. His name is Jaap van Eaton. He has a PhD. And this is his book on crystal skulls. This is my favorite crystal skull book. And in it, he talks about, and this is his crystal skull over here. I can't remember his name. He's a big, beautiful skull. But he talks about how to activate crystals, how to work with crystal skulls, what happens when they're carved. And as you can see by all these colors up and down, which those are bookmarks, and I've read this book extensively and have a lot of appreciation. This is Jaap here. This is his picture on the back of the cover. And he lives in Sedona. And he has a crystal skull meditation every once a week in Sedona. So if you're in Sedona, do go and look him up and have an opportunity to have a guided meditation with him. Interesting enough, his wife, Jeannie, also teaches people how to communicate with dolphins. So she creates human pods to communicate with dolphins. And I've had experiences with her at the workshop where I was actually able to listen or translate Dolphinese into English. It was done in my skull so that I could understand what they were saying. So once again, there's nothing really magical about this. It's just that if you and the whale, or if you and the crystal skull, or if you and the dolphins are on a matching frequency, then telepathy occurs and you are moved beyond language and can literally understand each other in a non-language way of knowing. Okay, call it intuition or just that you know that you know. So in this book, Jaap talks about, why a skull shape. And that's a great question. Why a skull shape? Well, I don't know about you, but I love my crystals and they're very powerful. But if I were looking for a crystal and I discovered a crystal, I would say, well, that's a beautiful crystal, and I might note where I got it from, and there may be a communication I get from if I sit with it. But if I find a crystal skull, I'm going to pay a lot more attention to it, mainly because, one, it looks like me. It's got a skull like my skull, and somebody took the time and energy to carve it or to mold it. Like some believe that they are literally poured into a mold and created from liquid crystal. But however they're created, the point is somebody's trying to say something to me because they've created in the form of a crystalline head that wants to communicate to me through time and space. So let's think of it this way. If I was an extraterrestrial part of an extraterrestrial civilization, and I was about to leave planet Earth or about to ascend, and I wanted to leave a body of information that others could tap into, then the best way that I could do that is to imbue that information into a crystal skull. That meant that anybody who picked up that crystal skull or discovered it would probably most likely sit with it and ask questions like, who are you? Where did you come from? What's your message? And from that, they would unlock the portal of knowledge between, the past and the present through time and space, from one race of beings to another, most likely in this case, alien race to the human race, about who they were and why they were here. So my belief is that 13 crystal skulls were created by every civilization that ascended off planet Earth. And there seems to be some evidence that there's been multiple generations that have actually gone through the ascension process, and maybe that's really what planet Earth is all about. It's not only for us to go to school, but for us to graduate and to become multidimensional human beings, so that the third dimension is just one of the many dimensions that we inhabit. Because we're multidimensional beings anyway, but we can't remember the other dimensions. And the crystal skulls help us realize that while we think that our consciousness is in our skull or in the crystal skull really is interdimensional and allows that extraterrestrial or that consciousness from wherever to be able to travel through space and time into this dimension. So that's why the shape of the crystal skull and why it's important. And so how to categorize crystal skulls? That's the second question that's posed in this book. Well, there's modern skulls. There's crystal skulls that are being carved as we speak, some of them very beautifully done. And I have many little ones. Like, for example, here's a little one that's carved, and this one is obviously has a large cranium, very much like the Egyptian pharaohs. And it's, symbolic of an alien race that probably inhabited Earth because of the elongated skull, elongated cranium. So this is one of the little skulls that I have, and of course I have 12 of them so that they can represent the 12 around the one, and the center being Serpent Rainbow Joe. So these are modern skulls, right? They come in all sorts of different sizes, shapes, and different stones, each one of them with their own properties. For example, here's one here that's a little amethyst, and he's a little bit more pug-nosed and a little bit more rounded in the skull. And this one is actually a whistle. Can't blow it very well, but he's a whistle. So all sorts of different shapes and sizes and different ways. So here's another alien skull, right? Very beautiful being. Each has its own personality. And so so these are the modern skulls that have been carved recently. And then there's these ones, which are ancient skulls. These ones go through time and space. And because it's stone or it's crystal, it's impossible to date them, because the only dating mechanism we have now is carbon dating, which is the way that wood or soil dissolves or degenerates or emits certain frequencies as it decays, that allows us to do the dating. And of course, crystals don't do that, so there's no way to use the dating mechanisms that we have on planet Earth to determine their age. So there's great controversy about what is an ancient skull, what's a modern skull, whether it's a hoax, not a hoax, and it leaves it in the level of mystery, which is probably where it should be. Because as scientists or scientific people, we want to know the answer to everything, when really the answer is from our intuition when we go inwardly, and it's going to be different for every person, just like it's different for each answer that each person gets when they ask a crystal skull a question. So there's original, singing, fully activated, and contemporary crystal skulls. So he also talks in this book, well, if you have a modern skull like my skull, then how do you activate it? How do you do ceremony with it? How do you awaken it, so to speak? How do you we work with it as an ally, because there's a consciousness of the crystal, and then as you carve the crystal to a certain point, which he describes in this book, all of a sudden there's an incarnation that occurs as the entity from another dimension enters the crystal, and now it's the interdimensional awareness just jumps geometrically, and that's described in the book. So the one becomes many, and so this happens at a certain point in the carving process, and I can't remember. I think it's where you get about 2/3 of the way through the carving process that the incarnation actually occurs, and it becomes a living embodiment of a soul essence from this or any other dimension. And of course, it has to do with once that's inhabited by a being, that being will then want to seek out its human counterpart in which to work with. So that's a bit of background on the different types of crystal skulls. So there's singing skulls that actually have, when they communicate to you, it's like in a singing, or it's like an Atlantean chanting. There's a melodic aspect to their voice. There's the original skulls that can't be dated, like the Mitchell-Hedges skull, the original skulls. And then there's the newly carved skulls, which you can still activate, and they can still download the keys and codes and programs from the original skulls. So there's different energies connected with different crystal skulls. Absolutely. It also depends on, what intention you have in working with crystal skulls. Are you using them to liberate human beings, to bring them into the light, or are you using it to control people? And I'm sure crystal skulls have been used on either side of that fence, and it depends upon the shaman or those that carve the skulls and how they use them. So yes, and the next topic he discusses is effects of crystal skulls on the earth energies. Because they're crystals, they can work on activating ley lines that are in sacred sites. So he's been to Great Britain, he's been to Glastonbury, he's been to the Well, he's been to the Tour, he's been to the museum and met the French crystal skull, he's met the British crystal skull. I think I have a picture of this is the French one. So he's met this one. He's in the museum and had a conversation. I actually wanted just to liberate this one. He's all behind a glass cage. He's really hard to see, and I just really felt that he wasn't very happy where he was, and I just wanted to smash the cage and bring him home, but I would have got myself into a lot of trouble by doing that. And he was in the Museum of Humanity in Paris. So that's the Paris skull. And there's also the British skull. I happen to have a picture up on the wall here. So just give me a sec and I'll download that. I'll get that picture of the British skull. He was the first picture I actually saw from my friend who had the book. So I'm just going to get him now. So I just tore him off the wall. So you could meet him. So here's the British skull. Very beautiful skull. Again, he's behind plastic in the museum. And there's all sorts of controversy about, was he carved, wasn't he carved, is he ancient or whatever. But I really had an amazing experience with him when I was there. A little 6-year-old boy came up, and I talked to his mom, and he could hardly contain his excitement to meet this skull. So I gave him Serpent Rainbow Joe to hold, and we talked about that and about the crystal skull. And he'd been drawing pictures about crystal skulls since he was a kid. So we had the conversation, and it was quickly apparent to me that all of what the archaeologists had said about this crystal skull on the wall of the museum really was a bunch of hooey. They really didn't know what they were talking about. And I don't say that out of ego. I just was that as anthropologists, and archaeologists, we really don't understand these things because we're trying to get at it from a rational perspective, an analytical perspective. We're trying to prove something when we actually have to let go and approach it through our guidance or intuition, in which we can then be on the right frequency to be able to communicate with these beings. These are living entities, right? And they're here to communicate with us beyond time and space from one civilization to another. Very powerful. So this is another crystal skull, which if you really want to think about it, we've imprisoned and put in a museum so nobody can really actually work with it. So it's just sort of strange. We're imprisoning advanced alien civilization consciousness and treating it as an art object. So there you are. So that's the British skull, the French skull, and many other skulls that we've met along the way. So another skull that is really quite a skull person that's really interesting, and there's been a number of interviews with him on the Wellness Show that you could track down if you go over to www.thewellnessshow.ca, and he holds a crystal skull meditation once a year, and his name is Joshua Shapiro. That's his name on the bottom of this book here, and he's a crystal skull carrier, got many crystal skulls. He's a personal friend. We've met many times and worked together and been at workshops together as well. So that's well worth reading this book as well. It's called Mysteries of the Crystal Skulls Revealed. It's got Sandra Bowen, Nick Nicarino, who has another skull that we met, and Joshua Shapiro. So these are all stories of primary people that have or worked with crystal skulls and their experiences with them and what they've learned by working with crystal skulls. So highly recommend. A great book. Gives you many perspectives, many points of view, people who sat with the skulls and received guidance and got lots of messages from them. So that's a bit about crystal skulls to do an introduction. This will become a small course on the Academy website, and I do have a 2-hour video, which is the workshop that I presented to questers using the information from this book that is in a slideshow or a PowerPoint. So I'll put access to that as well in the course. I think it'll be around $33 for people to come on that. And of course, if there's more questions that you want to have asked and have answers to, then there'll be an opportunity to do that both on this call and on future calls. So that's about it for an introduction. Oh yeah, I just wanted to talk about some other crystal skulls that we have in our possession. This is Sarah's skull right here, Bolva Ver, and she uses it as a channeling. So she sits with it and asks it questions and receives answers. So that's how she uses her crystal skull, and she teaches classes on how to do that, how to work with crystal skulls. So that's her little skull, made of fluorite. Very beautiful little skull. So that's another one of our family. And this is Lulu. Say hello to everybody, Lulu. Lulu is carved out of lava. She's from Madagascar, and she's really the grounding agent in the family. And you can see she had a little bit of lobotomy work done on her in that white square. So she's been through a lot. So I really love her. She's so basic, right? Somebody carving her out of lava. This is another crystal skull. This is the companion. This is the divine feminine that is the counterpart to Joe. And this is a very heavy skull. It's made out of black jade. And if you were to drop this, it would break a tile floor. That's how heavy she is. And the reason she's cosmos, if you turn her here, I don't know if you can see it, but it's like there's a galaxy. It's like the Milky Way or the cosmos that runs across her jaw. And so, and you can see the searchers in her skull, the visions in her skull. And so she's the divine feminine. She's the the yin and the yang. So these two work together and have traveled to many Mayan sacred sites and done ceremonies at those sites, downloading the keys and codes from those sites. So those two work together, the divine masculine and the divine feminine, hopefully teaching us how to balance that within ourselves. All right, so and then last but not least, in Mexico, this is from the shaman that I work with. He knows I'm interested in crystal skulls. So this is his gift. This is the Day of the Dead, where in Mexico you remember your ancestors and your lineage. And I think that's really interesting because if the crystal skulls we're actually remembering our lineage and our ancestors, which in many cases were extraterrestrial. So there's two more of these skulls from the Day of the Dead. They sometimes wear these, as helmets, and they do dances with the skulls on their heads. And here's another little one, the feminine aspect. So that's the Day of the Dead. All right. So that's a bit of an introduction. I'm going to open it up and see if there's any questions from anybody. So I'm just going to unmute both Monica, Monique. See if I can do that. Unmute. Hi, Monique. Do you have any questions?
You mentioned Yap that wrote the book Crystal Skulls. He's in Sedona. What is the full name of the author?
Yeah, okay. So I can put this in the show notes as well, or but his name is Yap. It's Jaap Van Van, and then it's Eaton Etten, and it's called Crystal Skulls Interacting with a Phenomena. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, great book.
Did you visit Sedona?
Say that again.
Did you visit Sedona?
Yeah, I was at 2 crystal skull gatherings there and worked with the crystal skulls in the vortexes there as well. And that's where I met the Mitchell-Hedges skull and the other skulls, except for the ones that we met when traveling in the Yucatan Peninsula, the Mayan skulls and the British skull and the Paris skull. We did that by traveling. But all the rest of the skulls I met at the Crystal Skull Conference. There must have been, there was literally hundreds of skulls there.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting.
So I'm just going to unmute Lori here. Lori, are you still available?
I'm still here.
Yeah, you got a lot of noise in the background there. So do you have any questions?
It's a quiet room. I just had a few comments, but if my audio is not good, then we'll just write them in later.
No, that's okay. Go for it. I just heard you down, but you are a bit scratchy. So what questions do you have?
Just a few comments. I found it interesting that you have made a group of 13 for your own personal ceremony and communication. I think that is an interesting aspect to your work. Do you find that the personalities of the smaller skulls gather communally and are able to represent or access more information through the master skull?
Yeah, I think all of that is true, but I have to be really honest with you. I really haven't paid attention to any of that. I really just let them be. I'm really aware of one of the stories that I heard. I'm just going to mute you and then put you back on afterwards. Just one of the stories I heard about crystal skulls in one of the shops in Vancouver was the person who owned a crystal skull brought it into the store, and the person who owns the store told me this story. And she said, this crystal skull's not very happy. And he said, well, why not? And she says, oh, I don't know. So he tuned into the crystal skull, and the crystal skull says, I want to be with you for a while. Tell that lady that I need to be with you and that I'll go back with her later. And so he told her, he said, this crystal skull saying that you need to leave him with me for a period of time. And so she said, okay, I trust you, I'll do that. So, and then he said to the crystal skull after the lady was gone, he said, so what's going on with you? And he says, I just want to be left alone. I have a job to do here, which is to, and do whatever he needed to do, and I just need to be alone. And so he said, well, how would you like to be alone? He said, well, take me out in your garden and ground me to the earth and leave me alone and come back in about 30 or more days and check in with me, and I'll let you know. So from that, I really got sensitive to the fact that my crystal skulls, particularly Serpent Rainbow Joe, his job is to meet many, many people, and he goes to some events, and he's even, had sleepovers with people, that he really needs some downtime. So I really let a lot of them just be in their circle around Serpent Joe, doing whatever they need to do and communicating whatever way they need to. However, having said that, one exercise we did that was extremely powerful, which is the Mitchell-Hedges skull, was the Mitchell-Hedges was put on a revolving dais in the center, and each one of us, 12 of us, got to sit in a chair. He then turned the crystal skull, and so we were looking into its eyes, and we got about, 3 minutes each to have an experience with that crystal skull. That experience of activation was so strong that the actual circus-like tent that this workshop was in, that had rebar, which was about an inch thick, which was pounded into the earth, the wind came up and the vortex was so strong that it felt like it was going to rip these stakes right out of the ground. So I know that 13 people with one major crystal skull can create a huge vortex. And I assume 13 little skulls with one master skull can do the same. So there hasn't been a time and a place that I felt was appropriate to call in or to work with that energy, but that doesn't mean that I can't or that I won't be led to do that. So that's a long roundabout answer to your question, but a great question. So I'm just going to unmute you again. So that gives you... Go ahead.
I really appreciate that story about the skull requesting to be grounded and having some time to do his work, and also the additional thought of doing work with your group of skulls, perhaps in the future, or people working with one major skull, that brings about a lot of reflections of healing or change that could be affected by using the skulls and meditators and facilitators in that way.
Absolutely.
Any comment?
I have a friend who uses crystal skulls quite extensively, and he does them on ley lines. So what he'll do is that there's a volcano or an earthquake, he will be guided on a map to put his crystals on the ley line with an intention or activation or deactivation, depending on what he's guided from the skulls, to create a neural network to connect the points together to either stabilize the earthquake or calm down the hurricane, or to do whatever action that needs to happen by working with the elementals. So crystal skulls are a great touch point between dimensions, between humans, angels, and elementals. They provide a bridge in which the communication can occur. So crystal skulls are really great to do those sorts of types of work around working with weather-related issues or geopathic stress, which of course is all trapped human motion in the ley lines or in the energy lines of the earth that needs to be released so that Mother Earth can go through the evolution and consciousness that is upon her now. And the more that we can use crystal skulls to help release that energy, the more or the less traumatic trauma she has to put humans through in order to wake up. So there's a connection between the crystal skulls, humans, geopathic stress, ley lines, sacred ceremony, and working with elementals. The other connection was when working with the whales, is that I had a dream. I asked, so why does this crystal skull, Coconino was his name, the first skull that I met, why did he want to come and meet the whales? And I was guided in a dream where I was told that the Arcturians, who are extraterrestrial beings, who are responsible for doing the patterns on the earth, the crop circles, also communicate with the whales. So the whales go to these certain places like we were at, which is the Silver Banks, where the mothers calf because they're secure in a protected reef area. And while they're there and waiting for their calves to gain strength so they can make the migration up the coast of North America, on this particular case, which would be on the East Coast on their way to feed on the phytoplankton in the Arctic, they are downloaded by the Arcturians with the keys and codes, and they sing these songs as they go up and down the coast, singing those into the crystalline grid of the earth, which helps her go through that evolution and consciousness that I was talking about. So there you are, a connection between whales, crystal skulls, and Arcturians as a way in working with the keys and codes and relieving and upgrading the crystalline grid of Mother Earth. So I'll just take you off unmute again. So now,
And go ahead. I really appreciate that answer as well. That was beautiful. The whales singing to the crystalline grids. But I believe you also mentioned crop circles, and for a moment there, I just had the image of the whale song being imprinted on the earth as well. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
yeah, I'm not familiar with that, so tell me more.
Well, it was something, that I thought you had just said. But perhaps I misheard you, but there's no mistakes. Just an interesting concept.
What did you think I say? Because that might be important.
Yeah. So what I thought I heard you say was that the whales sang the crop circles as images.
No, I wasn't saying that, although there may be a connection to that. I mean, it's all pure energy. So whether it's the whales talking to the dolphins talking to the humans, or us talking to them, or the crystal skulls being the communications of extraterrestrials to human, it's all vibrational frequencies. And of course, the creation of the crop circles is all done by frequency as well. So there is an interconnection in that they're all frequencies and all ways of communicating between extraterrestrial civilizations to humans on planet Earth, helping us learn how to upgrade our consciousness so that we can go through this next evolutionary step, not just as a civilization like the Mayans did or other cultures, but actually as the human race. We have this key transmutation point that we're in, where either we can create chaos or we can go through second order change and transformation, and it's our choice which are those two paths that we want to choose. As a result of global warming and increasing of hurricanes and all of what's happening as the Earth tries to cleanse herself, we can either go down with her, so to speak, or by doing nothing, or we could be part of the planetary cleanup crew working with crystal skulls and grids and learning from the keys and codes that are being transmitted to us through the crop circles to upgrade ourselves and therefore collectively upgrade humanity, so that this passage from one level of consciousness to the other isn't as bumpy as it could be. So hopefully that makes some sense as well. So I'm just going to unmute you again.
Yeah, that definitely does make sense. And, you know, who's to say that we haven't been helped greatly as it is, even though things are still, you know, not completely harmonious, you know, with all the activations and the people working along the ley lines and, you know, doing meditations and activating crystals. And, you know, I hope that we have actually received a great deal of help, and things are more harmonious than they may have or could have been.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Lori. That's exactly what is happening. If there was as much money to talk about and communicate about the things that you and I are communicating and the good news story as there is to say the bad news story, that we have a lot more awareness of all the incredible things that are being done on this planet as people learn how to work together and clear the planet of stress and duress. So I think we are much further ahead than we give ourselves credit for, and I think that that we're very close to being able to see what I would call the matrix starting to begin to have a bit of holes in it, so to speak. The sort of the neural network of the false way of being is starting to, I think, begin to dissolve over this next period of time as we learn to align with the sacred patterns, like the one over my head, which is the Shi Rantra, which is the divine feminine, which is sacred geometry from every molecule all the way up through creation, or the flower of life, which is behind me as well, which is, you know, the one that is by my head is the crown chakra, and the one that's to my left or right, the flower of life, is the divine sacred pattern of our DNA. And if we can remember who we are rather than the delusion of who we think we are, we will be freed from the matrix. We will remove ourselves from the illusion and remember who we are and see the truth of who we be. So I agree with you, Lori. I think we're much closer to that being a truth than we actually really know.
Thank you for mentioning the Sri Yantra, because I was waiting for that moment, because as you say, it's the divine feminine. And you had mentioned your crystal skull, the representation of the divine feminine, and you said she had a representation of the cosmos, the Milky Way, on her underside. Could you show that once again?
Yes, yes, her name is Cosmos, and I don't know if you can see it, but on the bottom is like the Milky Way, and it goes across the dark night sky and then comes up through her jaw. You can see on the jaw to her mouthpiece where she speaks the truth. So she's speaking the truth of the cosmos and reminding us of who we are and where we're from. And, you know, she's black jade, which was very, very honored. And she's carved from the same black jade that the Mayans used for ceremonial purposes down through the millennia. So she comes from the same source of many ceremonial objects used by the Mayans.
Thanks for showing that.
You're welcome. All right. So, any other questions?
Well, for my friends who didn't show up, I just want to make mention, I didn't know if you had seen the post by Kimberly Ann, and she has an artifact, which is the cranium, the skull, with all of the fleshy features also included, that she received near Mount Shasta. Were you able to review that image?
Yeah, so I saw that image. I wish I could bring it up right now. And too bad you don't have your camera so you can show it. It definitely is a serpent being. It's definitely from another, it's from the serpent consciousness, and it is an alien species. Interesting enough, they have been unfortunately seen as a negative force, but remember there's always the yin and the yang and everything. So while the serpent beings, like that reptilian being, have been responsible for, some of them, the lesser beings, have been responsible for enslaving humanity into the matrix through the dark forces that inhabit our planet. There are also the serpent beings or the reptilian beings of the light who are here on planet Earth to clean up that whole aspect. Because as a planet goes through ascension, every species has to go back and clear up all of its protege, all of its offspring, and bring them into the light, or they as a species will miss this vortex, this gateway from this dimension into the other dimensions of eternity that the planet is about to go through, because they haven't cleaned up their act. So that is a crystal skull of a serpent being, a high-level being, that, and the fact that it's from one of the major chakras on planet Earth, which happens to be Mount Shasta, which is also historically the site of Saint Germain and the inner portal to the inner Earth, is a very powerful being. And that if one were able to feel comfortable about working with that reptilian being, could have an incredible body of information to communicate. My first reaction was to possibly go into fear around it because of my experience with our feeling or understanding, or no, let's put it this, the mythology around the serpent beings or the reptilians. However, I can never, and I can say this with honesty, I've never ever had a negative experience with any reptilian whatsoever. And I see all beings as beings from source. So all of them may be lesser beings of the light. They're all beings of light. So I would see it and treat it as a guide, and I would treat it with reverence and respect. You'll have a lot of information in which to impart to its keeper, and obviously it's chosen whoever that person is as the keeper. And so if you would like to communicate with her, and I think I have her link, I'd be more than willing to work with her with that crystal skull and see if we can understand what that relationship is all about and why that crystal skull or that head wants to work with her and what message it has for her and for humanity as a whole. So one more thing about all that. In the Mayan tradition, the serpent Joe, the rainbow serpent that I'm talking about, is the activation of the full Kundalini, which is the serpent rainbow, when all of your chakras are fully enlightened. In your crown chakra, the Shirantra, the divine feminine, is open. So the serpent, in this particular case, the reptilian being, is a representative of that primitive force inside of us that once channeled up the Kundalini through the sacred divine marriage of the masculine and the feminine will bring us into enlightenment. So on one hand, you may fear this, and on another hand, you may love this and nourish it and honor it and allow it to rise in consciousness through your spine to be the true being that you're here to be. So that's what I get from that crystalline being, very powerful. And thank her for allowing me to see it. It's very, very powerful. And I look forward for the opportunity of possibly working with her and with that being. So I've just unmuted you again.
Thank you so much for your comments. I really appreciate that. And when you say, or when we ponder the fact that we're all here to, as part of the, universal beings that we are, that we have to, clean up, heal, and it includes everyone. And so I was happy to hear that you were willing to, work with her or speak with her about it. I've always gotten some indication that she was a lady of high regard.
The other
Royal
aspect of the serpent that I didn't mention is in a iconography of the Mayans. The man is coming out of the head or the mouth of the serpent, which means he has conquered his lower self in order for the serpent part of his being to emerge. So it's sort of like the serpent shedding its skin, but instead it's the human shedding his humanness in order to take on the skin of the serpent being, which is the wise elder, which is the illuminated, which is the rainbow being, which is truly who he is. And the human or ego is the lesser being, is really the one that's caught in the fear and doubt, shame, guilt, and all the lesser feelings and emotion. And it really is the wise serpent, the serpent being, who is the guide, the illuminated one, the rainbow warrior, the one that knows and is connected to source. So it's like we've almost got the message reversed. In Christianity, it's the serpent who is the evil one, when in actual fact it's the serpent and the kundalini that brings the wisdom. And so we have our stories all mixed up. I'm just going to take you off mute again.
Oh, thank you for mentioning the human emerging from the serpent, because that was a symbol that I'd often pondered, and of course it makes sense, when we look to the wise elders, who within our beings actually reside, just as beings reside within the crystal skulls. Yeah, interesting.
Well, any other questions? And otherwise I'll go over to Monique and see if she has any other questions as well.
I thank you so very much.
Oh, you're most welcome. And those were great questions. I'll come back one more time in case you have something else. So I'm just going to go to Monique right now. So Monique, I've unmuted you. Got any questions?
No more questions. Just want to thank you for the information. I've heard about the skulls, but what you've explained has me intrigued now. I think I'm going to go to Sedona.
All right. Well, research it and have fun. And if you want to ask any more questions, you know how to get hold of me, and we'll take this a little bit further. I think now we're at the point where there's lots of information for everybody to be able to do their own work and find their crystal skull, and then maybe we'll come together and do some more work together. So I'm going to say bye for now.
Yes, that sounds good.
And may you be blessed by becoming a crystal skull carrier in the not too distant future.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm just going to come back over to you, Lori, as we wrap this up. Any last words or comments? Are you there, Lori?
I'm here. Nothing comes to mind at the moment. I knew I had something waiting there, but it seems to have escaped me.
All right. Well, you know how to get hold of me, and if you don't have a crystal skull, and you're not a crystal skull gatherer, carrier, may you be blessed with one in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Upon you mentioning that again, it was interesting how you commented that about 3/4 of the way through the shaping of a crystal skull, that it was deemed to be embodiable, so to speak, by a higher consciousness. And it brought to mind just now, the the shaping of the human form before we were human, so to speak, when we were less shapely, and let's say the higher dimensional beings were reluctant to enter. So perhaps, you know, a raw crystal could embody a certain level of consciousness, but something that has a recognizable shape from, let's say, a DNA group or a lineage ancestor or descendant would be inhabitable, so to speak. And that was just a comment that
Yeah,
if you have something to add.
I think some of the extraterrestrial beings, you know, well, I think planet Earth is a very good place to learn how to deal with emotions. That I think for a lot of extraterrestrials, they were quite pleased to return home as multidimensional beings when they were finished learning what they could while being here. And I think also there was also a fear of the portals and gateways closing because of human drama and sacrifices and all the rest and wars and everything. And in some cases, they couldn't find their way home or couldn't come to their offspring again to contact them. And I even know now when we're on the Venus portal at the Mayan ruins, and by the I think it's behind the Mother Temple. Where is that, Sarah? It's in Guatemala. Um, there's a Venus temple. It's a flat platform that we've meditated on twice. And every time we meditate there as a group, we do have an extraterrestrial experience. So I think there was always this desire by the Mayans to make sure that the intergalactic telephone, so to speak, was still connected so that they could call home, or or those from their home could call them. And I also think that that's what the crop circles are about. They're a way of communicating through time and space and from one civilization of beings to another. I also think that that's what the medicine wheels are about as well, that they were like the telephone dial to the home star nations from which some of the indigenous people came from, so they could do ceremony in order to connect with their true elders, which were the wise serpent beings. So anyway, that's a little bit more of how I see the world unfolding. Yeah, and that was at Palenque where we did meditation on Venus platform. And there's some great video that was shot by one of the people that has there for both meditations, in which you can see this orb, this little orb, just like light speed across the sky, dancing in amongst the trees as it wanted to come and participate in whatever way. So, yeah. All right, so we're going to wrap it up here and call it a wrap. And thank you, both Lori and Monique, for showing up. And this will be posted in the not too distant future. I'll give you the link for both of you to be able to access for this and to enjoy it. It is going to be connected to that 2-hour-long Mayan ceremony and course that I taught, or actually presentation that I gave. And so I'll probably make it at $33 so people can afford to take it. So I encourage you I'll probably post this as a free video to encourage people to come and pay for the course, the short course, which will be about 2 hours long of a video. All right, so thank you for showing up, both of you. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll say bye for now. So be healthy, wealthy, and wise until we meet again. Bye for now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
More on how to work with crystal skulls, just head over to the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy in Google, and under courses, look for how to work with crystal skulls. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to the course, and there'll be a 2-hour presentation and also an actual Mayan ceremony and slideshow on how to work with crystal skulls a presentation that was given to the Shuswap Crusters a few years ago. So head on over and learn more about crystal skulls. And this is your host, Tyson J. Banighen, the Crystal Skull Carrier. Looking forward to working with you further.